Hello and welcome to the program. Today we're discussing the outcomes of the Ukrainian President's recent visit to Europe. Zelensky visited France and Germany and held bilateral meetings with heads of both countries. So what was discussed and what has been achieved? To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Osmolovska. She's international politics expert and executive director at the Institute of Negotiations. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So first question in general, why choosing these two countries as first countries for his first, let's say, official, really, foreign visit?
Well, it's always a two-way process. So because there are invitations and congratulations which are coming from foreign countries to our president upon his election, and actually the response from Ukrainian side also to all this invitation, it is a sort of matching times and agenda and priorities also to select the top 5 countries where the president goes first. So the first visit they made was quite symbolic because it happened to Brussels, where he visited both headquarters of EU and NATO, thus signifying that Ukraine is still on Euro-Atlantic integration track. And it was quite obvious to expect that next visits would be to France and Germany, because the top issue for Zelensky agenda is peace settlement and regulation of conflict in eastern Donbass, conflict with Russia. So, and therefore there was a need to discuss impetus to this dialogue in Normandy format, where France and Germany are the participating countries. So it was quite logical to expect this visit to happen.
Now, the first, I want to focus a little bit on first on the visit of Macron, and then we'll expand on the visit with Merkel. So first, the visit of Macron. How much Emmanuel Macron is sort of a model for Zelensky? How much are they alike, and what would you say are their difference here?
Yes, there are a lot of similarities in these two figures. They both are young, quite unexpectedly won the presidential race. But the difference is that Mr. Macron is coming from sort of elite environment. He worked some time for a Rothschild Bank. He also had an experience as the Minister of Economy, and he had his economic agenda for his presidency. So this is where he come up to his position. Mr. Zelensky is a bit different kind of person. So he's coming from completely different environment. Nobody would dare to say that he is coming from political elite circles in Ukraine, and he had zero experience in governance and politics running the country. So these are differences, but it doesn't mean that these two people can't get well with each other. And we see that they actually are getting well with each other because Macron quite bravely invited Mr. Zelensky as still a candidate for presidency to visit France. And so it is already a second visit, so it was a bit more to explore in detail Zelensky's position and vision of reforms, bilateral agenda, and other issues which are of common interest. So I think it's generally it's quite a positive visit.
Now I'd like us to hear one of the soundbites, one of the many soundbites from the speech of Emmanuel Macron with Mr. Zelensky. Let's listen to it.
Regarding the situation in Donbass, it's a conflict which has been going on for 5 years and tearing Europe apart. President Zelensky said that it's his priority. I am ready to support him in this intention and also in dialogue with Russia.
Now, that's an interesting moment, because this moment, not this one, but a little bit before, raised eyebrow when Emmanuel Macron talked about leading a dialogue with the separatists, and then Mr. Zelensky said that it was a mistake of translation. So first question would be, how much can the talent of comedian of Mr. Zelensky can help in diplomacy here, in those moments where you have a little bit of a hiccup?
I don't think that it was required a talent of comedian to respond in the way that Zelensky responded. I think it's quite, it requires a lot of smartness and wittiness of a person to understand that there is a clumsy situation and there is a necessity to highlight the principal position of Ukraine. So I think he made it brilliantly. And it doesn't it has nothing in common with his comedian experience, but rather with his understanding of what are red lines for Ukrainian party at the moment. And he quite well played with these cards, and I think the general impression was correct.
So would you say that this meeting was a first new step towards the implementation of impetus and of the implementation of the Minsk format, at least with France here?
Yes and no, because normally when you change one negotiator, there is always a room for hope that there could be completely different drive, completely different substance, and completely different progress. Therefore, Mr. Zelensky replacing Mr. Poroshenko in this format is seen to be this kind of new negotiator who could bring new impetus and also new substance to negotiations. However, this is just hopes for the time being, because a lot will be depending not just on Zelensky as a newcomer, but also on position from Russia. And for this dialogue to keep on track and to be productive, we need a cooperative approach from Russia, which we hasn't seen so far. Therefore, politically, I don't think that they could be done more at this stage. So there are political statements, there are readiness to cooperate, the readiness to push with new impetus for Normandy format. But in substantive terms, a lot of will be dependent not just on these two persons, but also on position of Russia.
Now, that was for the political and geostrategic side. But one of the sides, which is in the continuity of the meeting between Mr. Macron and Mr. Zelensky, is the economical side, and then the fact of meeting business representatives. Is it a sign that France is ready to invest? It's already a big investor in Ukraine. That French representatives of businesses are already begin to invest even more in Ukraine right now.
Definitely, bilateral business and economic cooperation was mentioned among the priorities of foreign policy of Mr. Zelensky, and we should expect, judging from personal chemistry which appeared between the two, that this could be the case for Ukraine and France for the nearest time. But in order to provide foreign investors and French investors in particular with confidence, we need to show that our judicial system is transparent and non-corrupt, that legislation is in place and the rights of investors are properly guarded. Only in this case we should expect for more investments to come, not just from France but from other countries as well.
And that's interesting that you talk about other countries, because after that, Mr. Zelensky went to Germany, and the agenda was slightly different here, and also the intervention of German Chancellor Angela Merkel was a little bit different. Let's listen to her now.
We agree that as long as there is no progress, the sanctions can be lifted, and that in regard to Crimea, they can only be lifted once Crimea returns to Ukraine.
I would like to call on you, and I hope you can hear me. We did not start this war, but we hope to end it as quickly as possible. We do not want our European partners to suffer from these sanctions, but this is the only way without bloodshed to end this conflict.
Now, that's quite interesting here, because there is the idea of not lifting the sanction, and that the sanctions will continue here. Would you say that Germany has more leverage on the matter of Russian sanctions than France have?
Germany has more principled position about the breach of international law, because for German society this is one of the key values of governance, the obedience of international norms, and for them Russia is considered as a rule breaker. So for this particular reason, we shouldn't expect Germany's position to change with regard to Russians, especially with regard to annexation of Crimea. because according to their view, Russia breached international order, and this view is shared among most of the countries. Therefore, I'm quite safe on this particular issue, but there is also a tiny issue of increasing sanctions, making more burden with sanctions on Russia in order for them to change their behavior. Because for 5 years of sanctions, we haven't seen any deviation from the current position of Russians. They keep standing on their foot regardless of sanctions. Therefore, there is a question whether the sanctions mechanism is effective as such, at least in this scale as it is, or it should be more. And this was the issue which Zelensky tried to discuss with Angela Merkel. However, on this issue, their positions still remain different.
And it does remain different, and also there is another issue, which is Angela Merkel is not due to stay in power for long. How to guarantee that, first, the successor of Angela Merkel will not ease the sanctions, and at least can Zelensky, I don't know, put some more leverage to increase the burden of sanctions with the chancellor of the successor, sorry, of Angela Merkel?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it is not the key value principle for Mrs. Merkel as a person. This is the key value principle for the German society, and I'm pretty sure that her successor would follow the same suit. However, we haven't heard that within this visit, Mr. Zelensky met with the successor of Angela Merkel. However, he made some meetings with top-level German politicians, the head of Bundestag and the president of the country. So I think that some sort of consistency in all these links and personal contacts will remain, and this is a matter of the German political elite as such. It's not just the personal issue of Angela Merkel.
Now, the German political elite, as you say, also, there is also this issue of Nord Stream 2. And how can Zelensky, or did Zelensky influence the representative he met over this issue of Nord Stream 2, which is continuing right now?
Yes, I also want to dwell a bit with regard to differences with Macron on principal issues, because this is the membership of Russia in Council of Europe. This is also an issue where the two sides expressed completely different views and approaches. They just fixed these differences in their views, and Zelensky was wise enough not to try to push very hard with this understanding that France might have different position. But he clearly stated that Ukraine stands firm on this issue. Same goes to Nord Stream 2. I would only welcome a more reasonable approach and pragmatic approach of Mr. Zelensky. He was not calling for Angela Merkel to use her efforts to completely block or stop Nord Stream 2, but he said that yes, we have different visions about that, and we would like to concentrate on issue of remaining some Russian gas coming through Ukraine's territory to Europe as a sort of balancing act, not to be completely dependent on one route of Russian energy sources to Europe. This was quite a wise position of a statement, I would say.
Now, what is, because Mr. Zelensky is pushing for the impetus, as we said earlier, of the Minsk agreement. He seemed to be a little bit closer than to the US now. Would you say, and would it be possible that the Minsk agreement could be open to such powers, and big powers, superpowers as the US, for example, in his mind?
We need to understand their key interest in order to assess the actual feasibility and desire to enter this club of Normandy countries. Because I highly doubt that US would be pleased with one in a line country role in this format. They would like to preserve their special link as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and I think that they will follow this route. Talking about UK, the country is in political turmoil at the moment, and their relations with Russia are in the lowest level in the modern history. So it means that whether UK participation would be productive for dialogue, and also the most important issue, Russia should be acceptable. Russia should be in favor of accepting new members to the club, and so far Russia hasn't shown no sign of this. Quite on the contrary, they keep on stressing that Normandy format is complete, and we would like to go ahead with this particular number of countries who are involved.
Now, and to conclude this interview, how do you see that the outcome of these meetings, how does it define, let's say, the framework, and how does it kind of design the framework of foreign policy's decision of Mr. Zelensky? Yeah?
Well, he was accompanied by his advisor and the deputy head of his administration, who is in charge of foreign relations, the guy who was nominated to become a Minister of Foreign Affairs. So definitely there is a sort of coherent team working on all issues, and Zelensky is not alone on this. With regard to the future of Normandy format itself, at least immediate future, he declared that there should be a meeting of advisors of the president in the format of 4 countries. But whether this would be a very quick step to the high-level meeting on the level of heads of states, this is quite questionable at the moment, because the heads of states would be ready to meet when they would have something substantive to discuss. This is question. And also in terms of framing generally a foreign policy of Ukraine, we should consider all these visits in line. Brussels, EU, NATO headquarters, France, Germany, and the US, which is coming. So obviously, having all these in one, we could at least understand main dimensions, main forms of Zelensky's foreign policy for the immediate future.
And we'll closely follow up on that. Thank you very much for coming in our studio to highlight these visits, Mr. Zelensky. It was a pleasure to have you on Tuesday.
Thank you very much.
That was Julia Osmolovska. She's an international politics expert and executive director at the Institute of Negotiation. Thank you for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned for the rest.